while Kojo and the team are coming up, there's a nice comment on the patient perspective in the chat box. I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. It says, ultimately, the patient provides the most complete context and ultimate validation of any integrated diagnostic system. The patient is integrating more than diagnostic tests, e.g., personal logistics, payment, personal economics, social context. The patient is also a silo, which we need to include up front in the build if ultimately this is going to work for patients in the end. The presentation of the prostate cancer report direct to the patient is an example of the need to incorporate the patient upfront in IT development and workflow and pipelines. And I think basically at the end, it suggests that we really can't develop an integrated diagnostic or AI software aid without including the patient. Back to you, Kojo.
Maybe I'll just address that point. I absolutely agree. The patients are critical here. And we shouldn't just say patients at home and then immediately say a tech company is going to solve that, right? That means us too. There are patients. It also means patient-reported outcomes using PROMIS, in other domains, maybe also in cancer. Epic can help with that and implement some of those, but we have to turn those on in health systems. But I think we still do a poor job of capturing a lot of that in any structured way.
Just to remind that virtual participants are welcome to submit their questions through the chat box. Any questions in the room?
I have one from the chat if there's no one at the mics.
Go to the mic. You have to go to the mic.
Okay.
There's someone walking to the mic now. If you can see.
Okay.
Hi, it's Saurabh Shah, Memorial Sloan Kettering. Atul, what's the data engineering investment needed to accomplish what you've accomplished in the UC system?
Yeah, so the question is about data engineering to make this happen. So each campus, so we happen to have a lot of expertise with something called OMOP. It's an open data model for clinical data. You can use other data models, but we can talk about OMOP and share code with each other. OMOP is also what the precision medicine program uses for all of us. PCORI uses, so we had that expertise. Each campus outputs their data in OMOP, then gives it to us centrally. We stitch it together. But we've been harmonizing data elements and have had committees to harmonize data elements every 2 to 4 weeks. That's been running for more than a decade since we implemented I2B2 and all these things. So it's about having the communities wanting, right? Every week a new drug comes out, a new diagnostic comes out. You all have to agree pretty quickly. What are we going to call this? Who's going to be first, second? So it's the culture, right? Trumps everything. The culture to want to share this data actually is there. But the business is what got this to happen, right? We can buy things together. We can start to consider which campus might do care that the other campus might not do. For example, liver transplants at UC Irvine, for example. Really start to think about what is the UC way going to be to practice XYZ, right? And then we're incentivized now to do our own comparative effectiveness studies. We don't need a PCORI grant to do it. We want to know which is the right thing to buy here, and then we'll buy it together, something Medicare is just learning how to do.
It's leveraging the economy of scale. Well done in the UC system. Charles.
Hi, Atul. That was great. A question about, you made the point about democratization of accessing the data, your medical student, et cetera. Are all patients consented in some common way? How do you at least handle that? I mean, I have strong opinions about I think sometimes we're overprotective, but I also know that each of those, having been at one of those UC institutions, has its own legal team and is scared about patient re-identification. And so how do you think about all that?
Okay, great question. So the access that a med student or a grad student has is a de-identified data set on the cloud. So that's HIPAA. Lucky for us now, HIPAA is more than 25 years old, so we know how to practice under those guidelines. We follow those guidelines. Yeah, but we have cancer genomes. So for us, we've already internally ruled that cancer mutations are non-identifiable. Okay, even if you run the germline clinically, we're not going to report those out, but the cancer mutations are not identifiable, especially from the XML that you get from a report from Foundation Medicine Rest. So that makes it super easy. Now, that being said, we have governance set up in place. So external use of data to companies, things like that, are all, there's committees to do that. Now, when I say de-identified here, let me go further. It's so de-identified, it's non-human subjects research. You don't even need an IRB to hit that cloud today, okay? Any med student, grad student can go log in once they get the credentials, login password, no further IRB needed. And where does that authority come from? Remember, every patient signs TACOs, Terms and Conditions of Service. Every one of our TACOs does say, we're gonna do this with your data, we're gonna do this with your samples, right? And HIPAA lets this happen. Now, if we needed identifiers, if we need to enroll them, of course we know how to do clinical trials. We know how to create proper consent, get informed consent. For this data use, HIPAA's been there for 25 years. We're going to do exactly what HIPAA says that we can do here. So they've all signed TACOs. Consent and governance and how do patients...
Yes, okay, there we go. So we have a number of programs. There's, for example, the Million Veteran program, right, where they will sign a consent for, that becomes a research program. They'll get those results, then get processed. And same thing with the LPOP and some of those other ones. There's a process by which when they enroll into that network, there's a consent process for research. For operational use, it is, it's something like the TACO, it has a different acronym. It basically, when they're in the system, there is a process by which they are agreeing that it can be used for operational purposes, right? And we have different categories, basically. So one is like quality improvement. I think a number of hospitals have this too, right? And then research, and then kind of like contractors working within the government, or if it's outside of the federal government. Within the federal government, there is certain restrictions also on security, privacy, and those other things that kind of get done automatically. Outside, some of those have to be put into the either data use agreements or contract terms. So there are a lot of, there basically, it depends where the data is, who's using it, for what purpose, and what consent, if any, was needed for it in terms of how it gets used.
For your AI centers in particular?
Oh, well, again, it depends on what it would be used and what it would be done for. So let's, so is it a project where you're doing research and I'll give you an example. So we had like an AI tech sprint. We wanted to involve industry, right? So just the minute that happened, that project had to have a certain data use agreement, had to have consent. Like they're basically checkboxes that have to happen once you expand the scope beyond what you maybe originally intended. And it's best to kind of think of that at the beginning, right? So in that project, we thought, okay, we want to do that at the beginning, so let's get the consent at the beginning rather than like coming back to them later. Yeah.
Question from the floor. Name and affiliation, please.
Yes. Hi, Mary Politi from Washington University in St. Louis. I have a question about your last 2 points. I'm surprised that there wouldn't be cancer precision medicine tools for patients, and I wonder if this may be an issue with use and actually not sharing some of the tools that have been developed in research and translated into practice, which relates to, we can build these, but people don't always use them. Or is it that we really haven't gotten that advanced yet with specific cancer precision medicine? Maybe you have global decision tools.
So what do I mean by that? So there are efforts by Cancer Commons and others to try to build websites on top of some of the guidelines that we have. So if you've seen this mutation, your doctor should be recommending this kind of drug and things like that. But there's no sustainability kind of path for those. And so I think the financial incentives there are not set up well at all. You can build it, no one comes kind of thing, right? For a lot of URLs out there. I just think it gets even harder for rarer cancers or rare tumors. Where you can't even really do a Google search on some of these terms because you're not even sure what you're going to hit. And so if you have a rare tumor with mutations, then it gets even harder to know what's going to happen next, what's the prognosis for that there too. Maybe Gil has something to say here.
I might add a little bit. So at the VA, we have an app store, like I think a number of institutions have app stores, but there's the ability in that app store for veterans to get access to their medical information as part of the app. It works through a number of testing services and so forth. In addition, a number of veterans also, they get their drugs, pharmaceutical products through CMS. So there's kind of a link that some of the apps have there. And so I can tell you about one app that actually we worked with the team on that one, which was the clinical trial selector. It's an app up there where it allows veterans, because usually when you have a clinical trial, right, the trial is recruiting the people, right? But you're talking about patient facing, so it's like the patients are searching for trials or for a caregiver based on what's in the medical record, a lab test, genetic kind of lab test, or it could be, what therapies they've had, and it searches through both structured information, like from the National Cancer Institute, as well as kind of some of the semi-structured or unstructured information from like clinicaltrials.gov and other sources. Uses NLP, a little bit of AI to do mapping to the different things that are in their medical record, and then it gives them results as well as ways to contact those locations within the VA. So, I think that's kind of one example. There are a number of other apps, but that's just kind of one of them. And at the App Store, I mean, I think if you just hit VA App Store, you'll see some of them out there.
Great, thank you.
We'll take one quick question from the floor.
So,
Doran.
Dorin Komanichu, Siemens Healthineers. So I want to ask a question about the future, right? So yesterday I returned to the US, and pretty much technology at work, right? They took a picture. I didn't even stop. That was my perception. I was just walking. There was a picture. Oh, Dorin, welcome back. Done. So now, when you think health, right? When you think health, when we will see that actually the patient information, the integrated patient information, is being processed, and there is an explainable decision where you say, this is your diagnosis, this is your decision, this is your therapy recommendations, this is how you're... So a question for you is that you're both representatives of very large healthcare organizations. When this would happen? It's a question.
I'll let Gil go first. I don't know. Okay, I'll go first. Look, I think, I get all the caveats we've been talking about all morning with the quality of data, the ontologies, and we argue about these things forever going back to CA Big, okay? And then we're still no closer, no further, right? And in the meantime, I think we're looking for perfection, but we're comparing perfection to the perfect care we deliver in our own health systems, right? And meanwhile, I think sometimes we should be comparing to is the average care delivered in the United States, right? By folks who are not in a room like this, never are going to be invited to a room like this. And that care isn't great at all. It doesn't have to be great. And so, yeah, okay, it doesn't perform at a level of, the curation is not as good as a UCSF or Sloan Kettering curator oncologist. I get that. But is it still good enough to deliver care in a lot of settings where they're not going to know what to do? And maybe someday they'll push a button to say, I'd love to deliver care like Sloan Kettering. I'd love to figure out what the order set is from UCSF. Maybe they'll even pay money for that, right? I mean, so I think there's products here. I think they're going to be generated. I think they're going to be delivered. If we as health systems figure out how to do this, we'll do it. Otherwise, I know the third parties out there are definitely going to figure out how to do this with or without us. And they'll figure out the withs who want to join them and skip the without us, the ones who don't want to join them. So I think it's going to happen sooner. We'll put a number, 5 years, right? And I'll show you what ChatGPT off the shelf even knows about cancer patients that our own med students and oncologists are missing. They didn't realize MP was mammoth printed in this note. So that blew me away. And that's off the shelf. That's for last year's version.
I agree with that. And just to add that, people look at, the large organizations, and yes, there's some differences, right, obviously with the small organizations, but kind of reminds me of this movie. I don't know if you've seen it. Is it The Devil Wears Prada or something like that, right? Where they were saying, like, so how do you think these really fashionable things end up, being like $5 a piece, in like 10 years, right? Like, there's this investment cost, and it needs a large scale to do it. But then everyone gets to have advantage of that over the long term. And so many of these things that we're seeing now, we'll see later. So for example, like, we all are here, there's air conditioning, heating. I mean, the kings, the emperors, just like 100, 200 years ago, that wasn't even a luxury they could even have, right? So I am convinced that what we're talking, anything at the large scale will be possible at smaller scales, and there'll be new things possible that today we're not even dreaming of, like that air conditioning that 200 years ago people wouldn't have. Would you trade to live in that big mansion without air conditioning today? No, right? I would rather live in a smaller, again, condo or whatever, right, with air conditioning. So yeah, that's kind of something to think about. I think there's all these things are possible, and it sort of takes an investment at a large scale sometimes to make the first iterations happen.
We'll make that the final word. And for a person who lives in New York City, I do appreciate living in an air-conditioned condo, which is small. Thank you very much. I'd like to, Nancy and I would like to thank the speakers and conclude the session. We won't want to stand between you and lunch, and I think we reconvene at 12:45. All right, let's do it. Thank you. Thank you very much.